So we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, for those who haven't met me before, I don't think I've actually met any of you. My name is Fiebrantz. I'm currently the director at Industry University School. This is upcoming on my second year there. Prior to that, I was at Cypress Bay High School in South Florida for 5 years. During that time, we became one of the first public schools in about 10 years to qualify teams to the TOC. We started the policy rate team at Cypress with like 2 kids. And then when I moved on to my next school, we had a team of about 12 and we're attending national tournaments, year-ends, etc. So I don't say that to say that I'm awesome. I say that to say that I have some unique experiences with debating at a small school, what that might look like, and some strategies along the way. So we have a PowerPoint that I'm going to share with you all. Can you see that? Cool. So at any point, if you have questions, please let me know. I'm going to ask you all questions along the way, I promise. This will be significantly more boring if it's just me talking. So please feel free to interject. And the other part about this is like not everyone's experience is the same. So if you have specific questions or concerns that you want me to cover, please let me know. So first, we'll discuss administrative support, some kind of tips and tricks on getting administrative support. We'll discuss different types of coaching, prepping for tournaments. We'll discuss tournament presence, and then what doing your own prefs might look like. I think prefs are sometimes the more daunting task of being at a small school. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. Not a whole lot, because there are other lectures about prefs. I mean, Allison Harper wrote her whole dissertation on prefs. So I am not the expert, but I will give you some tips and tricks. So is there anything else aside from those things that you would like me to cover in this lecture?
I assume this is, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, it's perfect. Thank you. I assume this is covered in maybe like prepping for tournaments, but like organizing research, especially when you have very few like varsity or like JV members who do card cutting.
Yes. That is always a struggle. Yes, we talk about that when we talk about prepping for tournaments. If I don't cover something that you wanted to talk about when we get there, let me know.
Perfect. Thank you.
Of course. Was there anything else y'all wanted me to cover that isn't?
This might also be like included in prepping for tournaments, but maybe like strategically like picking things like AFs for like when you don't have that many, like resources or people to work on. With.
Yeah, it is not, but when we get there, I will talk about that. I have some mini thoughts on that. Cool. All right. So first, we should probably talk about what a small school is. Can someone tell me what they think a small school is when we're saying small school in reference to a policy debate?
Probably like less than 20 kids on the high end with like one coach.
Okay. So less than 20 kids and one coach. So what if I were to tell you, so like North Broward Prep, they have definitely less than 20 kids. Would we call them a small school?
I sort of think of small schools as any school that doesn't have like a lot of institutional support. So there isn't like a big debate program for the students.
Yeah. I always like to start the conversation here. I think that's absolutely right, Kit. So I think we talk about small schools, and I think we have this perception that it's a numbers discussion, but it's really not. If you have 1 varsity teams and 20 novices, you're probably still maybe a small school depending on the situation. If you have a class and have a coach, but that coach, doesn't do policy debate or hasn't coached in umpteen years, that doesn't mean you aren't in this category of small school necessarily. If you had asked me, you know, a couple years ago, I might have said North Broward Prep might be a small school. Certainly would not say that now. I think it depends on all of those components. So I would say it's not about the physical number of students, but a question of levels and types of support that are given at your institution. I would also probably say, and this isn't always true, but I would also be very hesitant to call most private schools a small school. So like I'm starting, like NSU University School did not have policy debate before I joined the team or joined the school last year. And so we have like 8th graders, but I would not call us a small school because we have lots of institutional support. So I think that's always something that's important to consider when we're discussing this. So first, we're going to talk about getting support. This list is not exhaustive by any means of the imagination. And again, everyone's situation is different. I think the situation is very different for someone that has like a coach that really wants to support you but doesn't know what's going on versus 4 kids at a school with no administrative support versus, you know, all of these different situations. But I think kind of across the board, one of the best things to do is get your school involved. Whether that be you have it as a sanctioned club after school, whether that be you begin to host things on campus. Those can be things like tournaments or scrimmages. We'll talk about the online version of that in a second. But it can also be stuff like public debate. You could do stuff at lunches as well, right? Like stump the debater type games. While these sound gimmicky and, you know, maybe a waste of time, maybe you prefer to be cutting cards, I think the key component to this is that you have a presence on your campus. And while that may not be important for a school that has an established program, it becomes significantly more important when you don't have that established program, because the fact of the matter is schools care about perception, which means if you perceptually look like you're involved in inner school stuff, it's more likely that they will support your extra school stuff. The other thing that I think is really good about this is you should invite your administration to tournaments that are close to you. I think this becomes significantly easier this year since, you know, we can probably all accept that tournaments are online at least through like March. And I think what's really helpful is inviting your administration to come to a round or 2 of yours and being like, hey, you don't have to leave your house. Here's the Zoom link. Because very rarely will an administration attend a debate tournament, see what you do, and then be like, that's the worst idea I've ever seen. That's not going to happen. It's not a good look for schools, for administrators to be anti-educational, which means that is particularly true. I think this is also especially true right now in a world of COVID because sports can't exist. I'm at a private school, so we're housed in the arts department. I am the only arts thing that can really exist and has transitioned seamlessly to an online forum, right? We're not having dance. We're not having dance concerts. We're not having drama productions in the same capacity that we were before. And certainly, unless you live in Georgia, I apologize if you live in Georgia, you're not playing sports in the fall, right? I joke because Georgia just voted to allow sports to exist. So I think those things are important components to this and a little more nuanced this year than previous years. It's very easy. Schools are getting a lot of flack right now for distance education, for less than stellar situations, but debate provides a unique opportunity for you to get support during this time. I think the other component to that too is once you have support, it's harder to take it away, which means if we're able to talk about support right now, it would be much harder for them next year to turn around and be like, I know we gave that to you last year, but not anymore type thing. And then the last thing is I think you need to have like a why is debate good speech ready for any teachers or administration. So you are your best advertisement. So you should always be talking about it. And you should always be willing to explain to someone else, whether that be a teacher, an administrator, a friend's parent, why you think debate is better than sliced bread. Does anyone have any questions about this in terms of getting support?
Yeah, I had a quick question. So
What's up?
the problem, I wouldn't necessarily say a problem, but my school is very supportive of having a debate team, but the problem we have is that there's only 2 of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess, hold on, am I not connected?
I can hear you. Lola?
Yeah, I'm here. Is it working?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, it stopped for a while. It didn't connect. But so my question would be less about getting my school involved, but getting like the students more involved. Because the problem that we have is my debate team is just me and my partner. There's just 2 of us, which can be kind of problematic trying to like go to bigger tournaments and, you know, have any reach at all. So I guess my question would be like, what tips do you have for getting like students involved and more interested?
That's a great question. So I think there's a few strategies. I think my question to you first is, when you say you're the only 2, do you mean like you're the only 2 policy debaters, or you're the only 2 people that compete in debate at your school?
We're just the only 2 who compete in debate. So
Okay.
we're involved in like the Urban Debate League where I live in DC,
Mm-hmm.
but we're still the only 2 from our school.
Yay. I was a scheduled child back in the day, Southern California, UDL. So I think the biggest thing is this, is because you are your best advertisement, being able to talk to other kids, doing stuff like what I said about like at lunches, I think is helpful. But I think what is really the best recruitment strategy is either 1, find your feeder middle school and see if you can help start a program there. It's inherently easier to recruit from middle schools because there's not a lot going on in middle school. So if you hook them early, it's easier. And then 2 is kids like to feel special. So if you go to like your English teachers, 9th grade, particularly English or social studies, and you're like, hey, do you have any kids that you would recommend to join the debate program? Then get their school email addresses and send them personalized emails or personalized invitations to a meeting to then discuss debate. And I think that's also really helpful because they then feel special that they're being personally invited to join the team.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Of course. Do y'all have other questions before we move on? Okay. So is this really the next slide? Yeah. Okay. So the next kind of section is talking about coaches and prep help. There are kind of different levels of what this looks like. I think there is kind of 3 types of what we would consider to be coaches on a team. Sometimes we have just administrators. They're the ones that file all the paperwork, set your schedule, get you to tournaments. They're kind of the adult in the room, but they don't help you with like actual debating, argument generation, stuff like that. This is typically true if you have like a teacher that's a club sponsor, or if you are on a team of many events. So often this happens with policy debate in particular, if you are on a team that has like PFLD, et cetera, et cetera. So while you might have administrative support, school support, that's not really the type of coaching you need. The second is prep coaching, which, you know, can help with general thoughts and strategies, but often doesn't generate arguments. They can provide guidance before tournaments, but probably not before rounds. And then argument coaching, which helps develop deploy strategies for various types of debate rounds. These types of people are probably the ones that are helping you cut politics updates. cut specific case negatives, discussing before a debate what you are reading in the 2NR or the 2AR, because those are the speeches you should be prepping for, and then kind of going from there. Keeping this in mind is helpful when we talk on the next slide, I believe it's the next slide, about how one would procure said coaches. Yes, it's like I did this in order. So often a question presented to me when asked is, who do we hire to help coach us? And I think there are various forms of what this looks like. I think this becomes easier if you have an alumni group at your school, or you have people that are willing to donate their time because they maybe once went to that school. I often am able, especially at Cypress, when those kids graduated, I was able to get them to come back for a year or two after they graduated because they felt a sense of ownership over those novices and that novice success. And that's the reason why they would then come back. So alum are always the first place you want to look. I understand often it's difficult because debaters don't keep the best records or you don't know who has gone to your school. You don't have that alumni network. So then I think what you would do is go beyond that kind of resource. I think often what happens is kids that are looking, so if you're one of like 4 kids at a school that's looking for an external coach, I think often what happens is they will try to find someone that has just graduated, was successful when they debated in high school, and hire them. I don't think there is necessarily anything wrong with that, but I would have 2 caveats to that. The first is, I think, typically speaking, your most successful debaters do not often make your best coaches. Winning debate rounds certainly requires a level of skill, but it also requires a level of talent. And some of these kids, while maybe they, sucked and developed that talent, some of them are also naturally talented, which means it becomes increasingly difficult for someone that's naturally talented to teach those skills to someone else. So I always caution people in terms of that. But the second part of that too is, if they've just graduated high school, they don't have the coaching experience that sometimes is necessary to be successful. If you look at some of the more successful overall teams, very rarely do you find them hiring first year out or even younger coaches. Most of the time they're hiring older people that have many years of experience, even if they weren't as successful. You don't really care about the shiny name. What you do care about is their ability to care about your success and their time and capability of helping generate that success. So I would always caution people on that. The second is, what type of help do you need and do you want? Do you have 4 or 5 kids that can churn out all of the cards you need, but you don't know what cards to look at, what things like that? It's very easy to hire someone to cut a bunch of cards, but it's sometimes more difficult to hire someone that's a strategy coach, right, to help develop the overall picture of these arguments. You really need both types of coaches to be successful. Sometimes you can find that in a single person. Sometimes you have to be willing to put in the card work, so you can sacrifice that component and find someone that will help you generate these overall things. The last component to this is, I think it just passed this year, but there's always a good 2-month time period where on the Facebook policy page, literally every human being that has debated in high school and just graduated is posting that they would like to get hired. And then there's a bunch of comments that are like, yes, this person's my BFF, they're amazing, hire them. And while I'm sure these are all amazing humans, that's not exactly the best recruitment strategy. Sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you do get lucky. But I would always caution you, and I would also ask around. So I think that's something that you can ask lab assistants, lab leaders, friends in the community who you're considering hiring. And then I also have conversations with them prior to hiring. So I wouldn't hire sight unseen. I think it's very reasonable for you to ask for samples of work and have discussions with them prior to hiring them so that there is that level of formality too. There's often sometimes a weird power disparity because you are likely the one hiring the person and you are younger than they are. But at the end of the day, you need to ensure that they are providing the work necessary. What questions do you all have about hiring people? No questions? Is anyone thinking of hiring people this year? Okay, the last thing I would say about this component is I think it becomes easier this year with Zoom, right? Online debate means you're likely also having your meetings online, at least one would hope so, which means that it's also a lot easier for you to be able to hire someone. So yay, silver linings of online debate.
I have a question. If
No
we
worries,
would
what's
hire
up?
someone, how does that work, like with school administration?
It depends. It depends on the school. It depends on how that functions, right? So for when I was at the public school, what all we needed to do is have them get fingerprinted and go through a background check. Actually, the process is identical now that I'm at a private school, now that I think about it. So that was the process. Sometimes they didn't need to be fingerprinted and background checked because you were never alone in a room with them. Sometimes we had to use like petty cash to pay because they weren't a contractor, so the school couldn't cut them a check. That's a conversation to have with your debate coach proper and figure out ways. There's always workarounds to figure out a way to hire and get the help you need. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Of course. Are there other questions about hiring folks? So the last part of this is kind of realistic expectations of external coaches. I think often what happens is people think external coaches are like the magic wand that will suddenly make you a tournament champion. That is not necessarily the case, but what you should do is you should have a very specific idea as to what you want and expect out of your coach. Whether that be argument direction, they're probably not going to cut whole files, especially for college debaters. They're likely cutting stuff for themselves, but they can help you. They can help you listen to speeches, record speeches, listen to redos, drive research and prep, and then help provide insights on judges, teams, etc. I think that's typically true, especially of college debaters or college coaches, because they know more people in the community. Some of us, have been doing it for not a long time because we're not old or anything, but know lots of people, and sometimes that's helpful. Questions about this? So now we're going to talk about tournament prep. So how does a small school prep for tournaments? What does that look like and how that might differ? First and foremost, I think that one of the best things you can do is you should become an expert on 1 to 2 issues. And you should always keep the debate within your realm of expertise. That doesn't mean you have to be a critique team. What that does mean is you need to pick one thing that is your thing for the year, and then you need to become an expert on it. It is unlikely as a small school that you are going to cut brand new DSAG counterplan strategies for every single team on the circuit. That's not something that's possible. It's also not likely that you're going to cut brand new critiques for every team on the circuit. Like that's not a thing that you should do and you should spend your time doing. But what you should do is you should decide what type of team you're going to be, decide what your 2&Rs are going to be 90% of the time, and then figure out what that looks like from there. And even if that means you're going to go for politics all the time, cool. Politics, executive counterplan, that is your core negative strategy. So then figuring out what that looks like, giving speeches on that, I think is particularly important. The second part of that is if you are going to be a critique team, starting early, reading books, books are your friend, and going from there in terms of doing that. What you should never, ever, ever do is if you plan to be like a politics team, right? So you're going to read elections till November. You should not take the DDI file, copy and paste it, and then be like, cool, ready to go. While the file's awesome, the people that wrote the file are especially amazing and I think very intelligent humans. I think that that would be doing you a disservice. It's a starting point. You should always treat camp files as a starting point, but that cannot be the end point of your file production. The second part to this is in respect to affirmatives. Ben, you asked about affirmatives, yes?
Yeah.
Yay. Okay. So when deciding affirmatives, I think it's a very similar discussion. What are you best at? What do you want the debate to be about? And then going from there. I think what that means is more often than not, you will have 1 or 2 affirmatives for the year, and you might have multiple advantages that you kind of plug and play within those affirmatives. I do not think it's a good idea for you to cut 45 asks. It's not only probably a waste of time, they are probably short-sighted at that point because you're not developing the strategery around said affirmative. When deciding what affirmative to read, I think it's just like any other thing, which is 1, what's the answer to the state's counterplan? For this year, right? It's what's the answer to the state's counterplan? What's the answer to the abolition critique? What is unique or cool about your ask? And then going from there and deciding based upon those things. Does that help?
Yeah.
Cool. The next component about tournament prep that I think is important is case negs will literally be your best friend. You should not write a case neg to every single team on a list. You should not write a case neg to the top 5 teams in the country. What you should do is you should look and see teams that are within your range of a school, right, of a team who is similar in skill sets, who are going similar records as you at tournaments, and then just above. So if your goal is to break at a tournament, then you should be looking at the bottom half of a elimination bracket and prepping to those teams and then going from there. You should not only prep to the top. What I would start with when you go back to school or in camp is I would create a list of the most popular asks that you think people will be reading this year and then cut those case negs first. Then, as tournaments happen, the wiki will become your best friend because unlike large schools who will have multiple entries at multiple tournaments across many weekends, you will rely on intel from other people. So you can then go to the wiki, find out what affirmatives people are reading that are on your watch list, and then modify case negs if you've already written them and make it specific to their 1AC or cut a new case neg. I think the other part about this is becoming friends with people. So if they go to a tournament, you can talk to them about what was happening at the tournament, who was reading what, things like that, which I think are also important. The second thing that I would say is you should look at wikis. So unlike a larger school where, 20 kids and 10 coaches can sit around a squad room talking about debate, that likely does not happen the same way at a small school. So number 1, your debate partner should become your best friend. You should be having constant conversations about debate. One of the most notable things about any team that has won a national championship is that they constantly talk about debate. Doesn't mean it's in debate practice. It means they're thinking about it as they're folding clothes or cooking dinner or whatever it may be. They're thinking about it and then they're talking about it. I understand that it's a little harder on Zoom or, you know, in virtual land, but I think that's something that you need to make an active effort doing. The second part about that is when you're able to comb the wiki for argument ideas. You should not be think that you are pigeonholed in a corner, forcing to invent your own arguments. No one is inventing a new idea. Everything is recycled. So it is perfectly acceptable for you to get ideas while looking at other people's wikis. And even cutting those cards. You shouldn't copy paste the card, but you can certainly go to the article that someone is using and cutting those cards. And reading them like as an argument, not even just as like recutting as a case neg. And then the third thing I would say is you should always prep, and I think I said this a little bit before, but you should always prep common affirmatives. So you should prep the big affirmatives first. So DDI is a good example, right? We have 2 labs reading white collar crime ask. Maybe that means it's a big ask this year. I would go look at that. I would also go look at the trend of what the top labs in the country are doing at debate camp. What affirmatives is the California Debate Institute reading? What affirmatives is UMich reading? What affirmatives is SDI reading? And compiling that list, and then deciding from there if you think those are viable affirmatives for the year. Spoiler alert, this happened immigration topics, so a few years ago. So a few years ago during camp, at some of the big camps across the country, HSI, so high skilled immigrant workers, was a huge ask at camp. That ask began to die during the year because there was not a built-in answer to the state's counter plan. So while it makes sense to cut a case neg, it's probably doesn't make sense to spend a whole lot of time on that affirmative because it was going to lose to the state's counter plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thank you, Abby. Thanks, Owen. So I think those are the things you should consider. You should not be prepping and here's the other thing, when you look at the wiki, you should also kind of be able to tell if who they're reading their affirmatives against. So if a team has 2 affirmatives and they only ever read one of those affirmatives against a K team, and you're not a K team, it probably doesn't make sense for you to prep that case neg. Do you all have questions about tournament prep?
Yeah, I think I have one. So I'm not really sure if this is about tournaments specifically, but so with my school, we don't really go to a lot of tournaments. So I guess I'm wondering like how you'd recommend improving between tournaments, if that makes any sense.
That's a great question. There are 2 ways for you to get significantly better, significantly faster. The first is speaking drills. You should be doing speaking drills every single day. 20 minutes at least, I would say. But yeah, you should do speaking drills every single day. Just as you would practice for a sport, you would do the same thing for debate. The second is redos. I think that's especially true when you only have 2 people on a squad and you don't have like a squad to do real debates. What you should then do is you should take demo debates. Many camps have published their demo debates so far this year. You should take any other recorded debates that exist, like after the season opener, after Green Hill, etc. And you should watch the debate, pause it before, like say you're the 2N, pause it before the 2NC, give a 2NC based upon the debate thus far. That gives you practice giving new speeches after you've done a bunch of redos, and helps simulate a debate without actually having a debate. The second way, or the third way, is you and your partner should debate each other. So while I think the 1N is all lovely, no offense if any of y'all are 1Ns, there's not really a lot going on. So it's very easy for the 2N to either skip the 1NC or give the 1NC because it's great spreading practice, and then have a debate with the person that is the 2A. You can even give the 1AR still and have practice with that speech. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
And then I think the other component of that is planning out debates and blocking them out. if you've already focused your debates into this one specific wheelhouse, then you can block out the debate from the 2NR backwards or the 2AR backwards. And you should not just rely on, oh, I'll write that in the debate round. It should all happen as much as possible beforehand. Other questions? Okay. So the next part about this is judges, tournament presence, etc. So one of the other hard things about being a small school is you don't know very many people. Oftentimes, bigger schools rely on their coaches who, you know, may or may not be old and have been in the community for a while to know people. So it's especially important for you to network at things like camp, at tournaments, which I know is harder online, and always making sure you're likable. I think it's very hard for someone to be taken seriously if they are constantly posting debate memes on Reddit, right? Like debate is a professional sport, perhaps, and should be approached as such. So your presence virtually and in person, whenever we get back to there, matters. And people have to want to vote for you. At the end of the day, judges are scared, and judges are scared staring at a small school versus someone else, you know, someone that they haven't heard of, and being willing to vote for that person. So being likable is extremely helpful. Talking and getting as many people to know you and recognize you matters. And that's really easily done at camp because you interact with a lot of different debate coaches and lab assistants who will inevitably be judging at tournaments and things like that. So being able to build that presence, I think, is particularly important. You should also develop allies, right? So if you have those 1 or 2 lab leaders that are like your biggest fans because they think you're amazing, then you should build upon that. You should reach out to them during the year. You should check in on them and things like that. When you begin to win or are winning, because you all are awesome, I'm sure, and you begin to beat bigger teams or teams that are supposed to be better than you, they will often at first be looked at like a mistake. Either the team made a mistake or the judge made a mistake. You have to be willing to brush that off and understand that it will eventually not be that. But for the time being, they're going to view that as a mistake. The last thing I would say about this slide is scouting is really important. So what are people reading? What are people breaking at tournaments? And that all comes back to developing friends and people that you can ask, but also not being afraid to ask, right? So for example, if we're at a tournament and your lab leaders in the judge pool, and they just judged the team that you're about to debate, not being afraid to email them and being like, hey, what did they read? Or can I have the speech docs? Speech docs, I think, are particularly useful and very easy ways to build relationships with people. Does that make sense? Do people have questions about that? Yes. So, I think during the year, you should kind of keep a Google sheet with 2 tabs. One tab being judge prep, the second tab being tournament intel sheet. I'm kind of always a fan of having that list and what people are reading for any given tournament and just kind of keeping it going. That way you can like check if case notes are done, keep notes to it. Before debate, you can go to and be like, oh, I remember their round that I saw from the wiki, they extended this card in the 2AR or anything like that. I think those types of notes are extremely helpful, particularly for small schools. But you gotta keep track of judges. You have to keep track of judges. Judging philosophies are only descriptions of what judges think they know. They are not descriptions of how judges regularly vote. So you, particularly at first, sometimes have to do a little experimentation, right? So you kind of got to experiment on some judges, but you need to take detailed notes as to what they have said. I've used Google Sheets in the past, so I've had my debaters just fill out a form for every debate round. Others have just used a Dropbox folder and Microsoft Word documents, whatever makes sense to you. But in that form, you need to have who you debated, what they went for, what you went for, what the RFP was, and any other general tips that you have about that specific judge. What will then happen is over the course of a year, you'll look at the data and notice trends. So in college, when we did this, we had this judge that we always pressed really high because we thought they were an amazing judge. About 3/4 of the way through the year, we were looking through our sheets and noticed that they like had dropped us 13 times in a row. They had not picked us up all year. And here we were like, oh, they're a good judge. Oh, they're a good judge. And just didn't connect the dots because it was over multiple teams. So keeping track of that stuff, I think, is very important. The next thing I think is important is privileging experience over ideology. When you do preps, you want to kind of create categories. The top category is best judges, no matter what debate round. The second category is oftentimes people that are ideologically inclined to agree with you, but at the uppermost part of that category should likely be older people. I have a rule for my team that I never prep first-year out judges higher than a 4 until they've proven themselves. And the reason for that isn't because I hate first-year out, but is because you don't know how they will vote or how they will respond to pressure until it happens. And I would prefer if that experiment did not happen on my team. You also want to make sure you save your preps from all of your tournaments, because then it's very easy to go back and be like, oh, this person should have gone down, this person should have gone up, and it makes prep happen a lot quicker. You also, when you're doing prep, you don't want to just consider who you are prepping, but how other teams might be prepping this person, because you need to think about when you would get that person, which means you need to also make sure that you are putting people that we consider class judges or compromise judges, so judges that we wouldn't necessarily want all of the time, but are good if we're debating a planless act or debating framework if we are the planless act, in a lower category than you normally would. The reason for that is then you are more likely to get them in those types of debates. I think preps are sometimes one of the hardest parts about being from a small school, because you don't have a coach that's been doing it for years help you with it. And that's difficult because it's a practice and it's a learned skill that doesn't exist anywhere else, right? It's not like speeches where you learn that. It's just kind of like this weird niche skill that you're never going to use again. The last thing I would say is when you go and you're looking at judges' paradigms, reading the paradigm is good, fine, whatever. I'm always suspicious of paradigms that are pages long. If you would like an example, go look at Nick Lepp's paradigm, unless he's changed it. It's literally like a dissertation. That's not to say I'm suspicious of Nick Lepp. He's one of my best friends. It's just a good example of a very long paradigm. But I would be cautious of people that put too much thought into those philosophies, because that means they're subscribing or abscribing their own beliefs onto those debate rounds. And that's something I would be very cautious of. The last thing I would look at is, who do they vote for more often than not? So are they on the tops of 2-1s? Are they on the bottoms of 2-1s? When they're on the tops or bottoms of 2-1s, who are they voting for in those instances? You have to also consider, as a small school, how this person will react to judging you against a large school. So was this person on the bottom of a 2-1 where they voted for a large school over someone that is unknown, right? That would be a red flag to me. Have they only always ever voted for a certain school? That would also be a red flag. So I am of the opinion that judging records tell you more than judging philosophies do. And being aware and cognizant of that, I think really matters when you're doing prep. Do you all have questions about that?
Yeah, actually, I had one question. So,
What's up?
aside from just like the team names of like certain rounds that they've judged or the things you've talked about so far, if you see that a judge has like sat a lot in elim rounds, do you think that says something about them, or is it just like it varies on a case by case basis and like doesn't really matter?
I think if they've sat, like if you are looking and they've sat in every single elim that they have judged or mini elims that they've judged, that would make me suspicious. It would make me question their ability to judge. I think the other part of that too that is actually important is, are they judging elimination rounds?
Okay.
Other questions? Of course. What questions do you have that I did not cover?
Is there anything you can do about like anything specific you can do about monetary barriers, about like physically having the funds to go to tournaments? Do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah. Well, one, excuse me. I think this year it becomes easier. I don't think tournament entry fees go down that much, given like classroom.cloud costs and stuff like that. But I do think you aren't then paying for like travel. But the other thing I would encourage you to do is, depending on the tournament, I would reach out to that tournament administrator and explain, I'm a small school, we don't have funding, blah, blah, blah. 99.9% of the time, they're going to decrease your fees. If they don't, they should. But I think more often than not, while tournaments are still a fundraiser for high schools, that doesn't mean that they're, they don't have hearts. And so oftentimes being willing to decrease entry fees is particularly something that they will do, because that's something they can help with. They might still require you to like have a judge, but they would certainly probably help with fees. But that requires you like being assertive and you sending the email and stuff like that. Other questions? Oh, of course, sorry. Any other questions? Okay, well, feel free to reach out to me if you think of anything after this, but thank you all so much. I believe you have an hour break right now, and then you have lab at 3.
Thank you.